This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Good afternoon, America. Steve Laffey with Steve Laffey's Fixing America, found at LaffeyRadio.com. We're broadcasting here from Fort Collins, Colorado, and it's freezing today. I don't even know how my guests made it up here today. The snow covered. It's one of the coldest days since I've lived in Colorado. 3.5 years. It'll be -10 by the time we go to bed tonight, and I got to feed the cows and the horses. But enough of that. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We've got Matt Mayer here today. Matt Mayer I've met about 6 months ago in Denver, and he does wonderful things to fix America. And one of the things he's working on is how these states and how states can compete better, and how we can find a way to fix America through the states rather than letting the federal government continue to grab more power, which, as we know from test scores in education, and we know from what's going on in Medicare, we know what's going on in the transportation bill, helping destroy America. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Matt. Matt, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming all the way to Fort Collins to be with us.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. It's always good to get up to Fort Collins and to be back in Colorado. You know, I lived here for 6 years, miss it dearly, and I love this weather because it gets those nice snow-capped Rockies, and as long as the roads are good, which they're fine, it's always great to drive around and look at those mountains to your left. Exactly.
We can't see them right today because of the snow still coming down up there. But, well, tell us a little about yourself. I know you for one of the people who are really involved in the Liberty Foundation. I want to hear about that. But how'd you get to, tell us a little about your background and what you've been doing and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, so, I have to admit I was a lawyer for a couple of years, so don't hate me for that. But left the legal practice actually when I was here in Colorado. The last thing I did was represented the Colorado Secretary of State, then Danetta Davidson, against the 19 plaintiffs in the redistricting lawsuit that was all about redrawing the congressional districts. After that case ended, I was asked to run a campaign, did a campaign there in the 7th Congressional. Then I did the U.S. Senate campaign with Wayne Allard. After that, worked for the governor, Bill Owens, for a year, got a call from Washington, headed out to work in Homeland Security with President Bush, hated Washington, and then moved to Ohio, where I essentially started and ran a couple think tanks, written a couple books, and have been involved in the Liberty Foundation of America now for about a year, where we're pushing competitive federalism and say, look, if we're going to get America out of the jam it's in, it's not by more federal power, more federal deficit spending. It's by getting the money and the power out of Washington back into the states and let the states be laboratories of competition and compete on a variety of issues to provide the best goods and services to their taxpayers at a cost taxpayers can afford.
And when we talk about competitive federalism, I actually went out and looked up the definition, because a lot of people don't know. I mean, they don't know exactly what that means. They're not 10th Amendment people,
right,
and so forth. So when I look it up, and I want people to understand this, it says competitive federalism is a term used to refer to prevailing competition between regional or local governments. People choose the government they want to be under, and investors choose the government they want to invest with. Make sense?
It makes total sense. And look, this is what's great about competitive federalism. It's not a partisan issue. I mean, Americans are tired of Republicans. They're tired of Democrats. They're tired of getting nothing done. Yeah. What's great about competitive federalism is it's not about R's and D's. What it's about is getting things done. So, look, Andrew Cuomo in New York wants just as much power and money over the things that happen in New York as John Kasich in Colorado, or John Hickenlooper in Colorado, or John Kasich in Ohio. And so our view is, look, let's let them have the power and money and have the debates in the states where they're going to come up with different ways of doing things. And when we've seen historically education reform, welfare reform, where the states can serve as laboratories of competition, they solve the problems, and then by doing so, teach the other states what works, and all boats rise. That's what Americans love competition. We love the Olympics. We love Saturdays college football, Sundays pro football. We love competition. Let's get more competition back into the American fabric, which is what our founding fathers stuck into the DNA of the Constitution, and we've forgotten that. Well, we want to remind Americans that's our heritage. Let's get back to that so we can compete.
And states do love competition among each other. We see the governor of Texas over in California saying, hey, this is a wasteland, I'm paraphrasing, of business. You got nothing good going on here. Come on, we've got it over in Texas. And we see people moving in droves, which is worrying some people in Texas, that the people might not forget how the problems happen in California, who moved to Texas or even here to Colorado. But we do have competition among states.
Yeah.
You'd like to expand it, though.
Yeah, and be careful, Governor Perry, because all those Californians that moved to Colorado in the '90s turned this state from fundamentally a red-purple state to a purple-blue state. So you got to be careful, but that's okay, right? Let the people vote with their feet. But yeah, more competition is better. And right now, the reality is because Washington and the federal government has become so pervasive over our lives, we're really competing on the margins, right? We're competing over, is it a 10-point income tax or a 7-point income tax or a no income tax? And out of a paycheck, it's the 35% federal tax cut that's crushing people. That's the hit that people look at and care about. And the states are now fighting over something that's 10% or less. We need to reverse that, get that federal portion much lower. So the states are competing. So the states are providing the services. The money never leaves your state. We're not subsidizing Jerry Brown in California with Ohio tax dollars. That's not fair. Why should Ohioans have to do that? We can solve our problems, Democrat, Republican, but let's solve them in the states by letting the states keep the power and the money.
And so right now, with so much money going to the federal government, let's just take, in fact, I have your writing in front of your competitive federalism, leveraging the Constitution to rebuild America. And in it, you write about some of the easy things, I might say easy, but things that people can really understand.
Right.
Education, transportation, Medicaid. Run through education for us. How does that work? The money come from the states to the federal government? And,
Sure.
And run through how that works today.
Yeah, well, so, for any of your listeners or people watching in the internet, the report can be found at libertyfound.org, www.libertyfound.org. So look, on education, we are spending billions of dollars by the federal government, i.e. taking money from the states, that then goes into this kind of federal role in education, No Child Left Behind, other federal program Race to the Top, where we have a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington who are trying to dictate how things are done. And the reality is 30 cents of every dollar, 35 cents of every dollar we send to Washington, it goes to waste, fraud, abuse, or bureaucracy. So that money,
30%.
35 cents of every dollar.
35 cents.
Yeah, so we're wasting a ton of money. And here's the result. You talked about this, I think, yesterday, right? The educational results we're getting are getting worse. That we're not becoming more competitive against the world, it's best and brightest. We're actually losing ground. And that's not success. We need to get Washington out of the business. Let it collect data on education and almost serve as like an OECD data thing that issues data on, how the states are doing and all that fun stuff. But get them out of the mandates, the requirements, the federal money. We shouldn't have to say, can we have some money back that's ours so we can do some innovation? Let states control it. Let states determine what works. So that way, again, when you have one size fits all, we know how that works. If this federal solution fails, 305 million Americans are harmed. If we have 50 laboratories of competition all trying things out, and if California fails but Texas succeeds, guess what? It puts more pressure on California to figure out what Texas is doing right, and they reform. That helps Californians and Texans, right? Competition, the left always likes to say that, states having these powers, this laboratories of competition, it becomes a race to the bottom. And they're wrong because they don't get competition. It's actually a race to the top because no state wants to be a state like Rhode Island that loses Mayor Laffey to Colorado because they just can't sustain the tax burden, the power of the kind of blue social model. So you go someplace where you feel like you have more power to raise your kids, make decisions for your family that are in the best interest of your family rather than government making that decisions because you've promised government workers benefits that you can't afford. You have taxes too high. Businesses have fled. You have an aging population. So you can't compete. That competition will happen if the states have more power and money to compete, and Rhode Island will figure it out because if they don't, they'll continue to lose people like you.
And if they don't figure it out, then again, that's their deal.
Right.
I mean, at some point, Detroit never figured it out. People knew it was going to go broke 10 years ago. I used to quote it when I was running for mayor. But if Rhode Island doesn't figure it out, it's not that Colorado, when sent the money up to federal government, they sent it to Rhode Island to waste.
Right.
With no vouchers, no one charter school in the last 10 years. I told you my kids had a charter school here.
Yeah.
We're basically finishing college 2 or 3 years early. At less expense to me, no extra expense to the taxpayers. And it's one of the reasons that we're actually here.
Well, but even within the public school system, right? True. I mean, why are public schools in Fort Collins, Colorado, having to kind of march to the dictates of a city that's thousands of miles away by people who don't understand the problems of what happens in Fort Collins? They don't understand the demographics here. What are the unique student challenges in Fort Collins? Fort Collins should be able to do what it wants within its school district, public or charter. And the fact that it can't is a bit silly. The fact that whether it's, and on Medicaid, it's another great example, right? It's become one of the top 3 drivers of the state budgets across the country. And yet governors and legislatures across the country, Republican, Democrat, have so little power over their Medicaid programs because it's all driven from Washington. How much they get reimbursed, what are the rules, requirements, mandates, thousands and thousands of pages that they have to comply with. And all that compliance means is higher compliance cost. They have little control to kind of, again, experiment. We have to go to Washington. Hey, can we have a waiver from this requirement? Can we do something different? And may we, mother, may we? That's not what our Constitution, when it was written in 1787, ratified. That was not the design that our founding fathers put in place, that we'd have to go to Washington with a mother may I handout attitude. We've got to reverse that mentality and get back to states having power and control. So governors are putting the hand up, not out.
Well, you make a great point then. At the local level here, because there's so much school choice in Colorado, even public schools compete with one another. When I came to see about taking one of my children to a public school, I had thought I walked into a McDonald's, because they're not only competing with the charter schools, they're competing with the other public schools. You can drive as far as you want in Larimer County, take your kid anywhere you want to go, even for one class.
Right.
That's why I thought maybe I'd take a kid to trigonometry rather than us teach it, because we were homeschooled at the time.
That's right.
And so, but in Rhode Island, for example, or many states, you don't have that choice. It's just you go to the school that you live in the district. But you're saying that the governors of our states, who could try new things, but are sort of hamstrung, because one of the great drivers of their tax base and what they take in and so forth is Medicaid. It's so much of their budget.
Oh, yeah.
And yet they're handcuffed at what to do with it, other than begging.
Right.
Rather than having a new inventive way to take care of poor people's health care.
Yeah, look, I mean, Obamacare is a great example of this, right? Part of the Medicaid expansion was, let's dangle federal money, i.e. deficit spending, more bonds we're going to sell to China, be more in debt to China, right? Deficit spending that our kids and grandkids are going to have to pay off essentially. But that is all about dangling federal money so that states do what Washington wanted them to do, expand to 138% of the poverty rate to all these people, mostly, by the way, young, single, childless men. We already cover single moms. We already cover kids. We already cover the disabled. We already cover the elderly. So this is people.
And the veterans.
And so why are we being forced to say we need to take that money, or, right, we that money, essentially other folks are going to snatch it. It's going to be used for something else. That's not the way it should work. The states should be able to make these decisions and keep all the money that goes into the Medicaid budget. They never should go to Washington. They take their third for waste, fraud, abuse, and bureaucracy. States get their 65 cents back from Washington. If Jerry Brown in California wants to expand Medicaid to 138% of the poverty rate, let him. But let's make sure Californians and not Coloradans or Ohioans are paying for that through subsidies from federal taxes, right? And when Jerry Brown does that, as you know, as being from a former mayor, he's going to have to raise up taxes higher and higher to kind of, as Medicaid expands, right? What we know is when you expand Medicaid, more people show up than you expect, and they cost more than you expect. So as that cost goes higher, he's going to have to raise taxes. As he raises taxes, businesses, individuals say, forget this, I'm going to go to Arizona, Nevada, Texas, Colorado. After he continues to lose his business and tax base, he's going to be forced, or the next governor or the legislature will be forced to say, ooh, maybe we need to make some reforms like they're doing in other states and dial this back a bit. But right now, when you force everybody to do it, there's no competition, right?
I mean, states do have different reimbursement rates for Medicaid, I suppose.
Based on the state poverty issues,
but
yeah.
So much money, what I don't think people realize is, and you just talked about this, is how much money is actually wasted. But let's take a quick break.
Sure.
We'll come back and talk about it. How much people don't know how much money is wasted. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We had a great guest in here today. Matt Mayer from the Liberty Foundation has found his way to Fort Collins. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
It's 6:42 p.m. Time for Steve Plato and his son Dylan to do the dishes. They talk about everything from the yuckiness of girls to the awesomeness of his soccer team. Sometimes they don't talk at all. Then, hey! The dreaded splash fight. It's Dad o'clock, and it's the best time of the day. Because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Some conservatives out there are pushing what they call a repeal amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It would basically give states a veto over Washington. Here's the text of the proposed amendment. Quote, any provision of law or regulation of the United States may be repealed by the several states, and such repeal shall be effective when the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states approve resolutions for the purpose that particularly describe the same provision or provisions of law or regulation to be repealed. Republican Ken Cuccinelli is, of course, the Attorney General of Virginia. We all know him in Washington and a supporter of the amendment. Sir, you know, this reads like you don't have confidence in the federal government as such.
No, Chris, we don't. Steve Laffey, that was Chris Matthews talking about the quote-unquote state rights issues as they try to portray it in the press all the time. What we're talking about here, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And by the way, we're at LaffeyRadio.com. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Laffey Radio. Like us on Facebook. Go to Facebook. We'd love to take your questions there. It's a very cold day in Colorado, but we've got a great guest here, Matt Mayer, the first one to ever come into the studios here. And we're excited about having him. Matt, that is one of the questions that comes up all the time when I turn on the news, and the clips will play back from these breaks. And you can comment them or not comment them. It's okay. But many times you're talking about competitive federalism and getting states to compete with one another. What the media oftentimes does is talks about state rights and goes back to 1957 with Eisenhower and the 9 kids in the public school at Central School.
Central High. Yeah, Central
or go back
High.
to James Meredith in 62, where they took federal troops, National Guard or whatever it was, and brought them in. We're not talking about that.
No, nobody's talking about that, right? No, except the left, right? I mean, because they're trying to kind of bring up the boogeyman of slavery, of Jim Crow, and nobody's talking about that. I mean, the reality is we have the Equal Protection Clause, right? We have the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments that protect Americans from the kinds of stuff that these backward governors did or backward legislators did or folks did in the South during the Civil War, after the Civil War, to keep black Americans down. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody at all. So the fact of the matter is what we want to say is on issues like tax policy, education, Medicaid, transportation, right? Let's increase the competition between the states. That's not about saying, well, let's deny certain Ohioans, rights. That's saying, let's make sure all Ohioans are competing against Indiana and Kentucky as vigorously as we can. It's all boats rise. And, Chris Matthews, his clip really goes to is the repeal amendment. What Chris doesn't want to ever concede is that when we passed the 17th Amendment in 1913, during the height of the Progressive Era, it fundamentally took a check away from the states that our founding fathers had put in place. And that check was really important. I mean, everyone forgets that the way our structure was put constitutionally in place is the House of Representatives was there to represent the people, which is why they're in small districts and there's 435 of them. The Senate was intended to represent the interest of the states, which is why there's 2 per state and 100 of them. They were elected by state legislatures for the first 150 years or so, 130 years of American history. With the 17th Amendment passing, those senators became popularly elected, no different than the House. Okay, so fine, you maybe think that's great, but that took a check away from the ability of states to say, wait a minute, we don't want Washington to expand its power in this place. And if you, a senator from Ohio, vote for that, state legislature are not going to put you back in office when your time is up. That was an powerful, important check in our checks and balances system. The repeal amendment and other things like it are intended to insert that check back, because the reality is we're not going to repeal the 17th Amendment. There's no way you're going to get a majority of Americans to say, let me vote for taking away people's rights to vote for a senator, right? It's a PR thing that's a losing battle. But we do need to say states need a check on Washington. They don't have it. We've seen that with Obamacare, right? A majority of states opposed the exchanges, opposed Medicaid, and yet they're powerless against this law because Washington did it. The Supreme Court said, though, as long as it's called a tax, you can do it. States need a check so that, right, when Congress passes a law, because it's popular with some folks, but it's going to kill the states, Medicaid, right? States can say, well, wait a minute. State legislatures and governors say, wait a minute. If we say no, we should have some time where if 37 of us pass resolutions opposed to this, that should stop the bill from being presented to the president for assignment. That should be the state's check that we put back into the system. And if Chris was so confident that he had somehow majority support of Americans for some of these things, he wouldn't worry about that at all. But he's worried about it because he knows that states are going to say, whoa, you're just going to put more mandates and requirements on us that in Medicaid, you're going to drive our state taxes up by federal policy. Well, that's not what our founding fathers envisioned.
And it's not what I would say most Americans envisioned. They just kind of cut up. When you bring up the 17th Amendment, first of all, I'm not sure it's taught in schools anymore.
It's not.
I'm not sure that they would. In fact, tell us if you know, what was the historical basis for the 17th Amendment? It's 1913?
It's 1913. It was passed.
We got Wilson in power.
It's 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's the same year we got the federal income tax, right? And it's not coincidental that within 20 years of both of those things occurring, Washington began its growth on the states. It's not a happenstance, right? They now have the vehicle to fund the growth of Washington, and they now they've removed the state's ability to check them. And that's why by 1937, Washington got bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more powerful. And 80 years later, we now look at the federal government, and it's pervasive over our lives. From the moment we get up in the morning till we go to bed at night, Washington regulation, mandates, laws, rules govern us. Even when we're sleeping, we still can't escape Washington because they have regulatory powers over the energy that keeps the heat on in our home as we're sleeping and all those kinds of things, right? And so the problem was, leading up to 1913, there was lots of kind of smoky backroom deals. Some state legislatures had refused to seat any senators because they couldn't agree. And so there were some things that needed to be reformed, right? There's definitely some problems with how things were working out. And we look back and we can't imagine that, well, why wouldn't a state send 2 senators or a senator?
It's hard to imagine.
But there was lots of things going on, right? So there needed to be some reforms, but to reform it in a way that removed states from having that check on Washington, a very fundamental core refinement. David Hume, philosopher, used to, the series of refinements, which is where our founding fathers created the checks and balances. They thought it was very important to always have checks between the 2 houses of Congress, between the executive and legislative, between the judiciary and the other 2 branches, and between the states and federal government, right? We removed one of those checks entirely. And so that needed to be reformed, but in a manner that still preserved states' ability to say no to Washington. And once we removed it, all heck broke loose, and the rest is history.
And when they passed the 17th Amendment, I imagine the argument was not, let's give more power to the federal government. It
was to clean up the corruption that was going on and these smoky backroom deals that were going on in state legislatures, or their refusal to to put people in place. So it was a very populist kind of a campaign. And you had Woodrow Wilson, who became, was president for 2 terms. He had spent 30 years writing about the importance of growing the power of Washington. I mean, remember, the progressive movement believed inherently in a very Platonic kind of government. Woodrow Wilson hated our Republican democracy. He preferred the parliamentary system over in Europe because he felt that you needed these kind of philosopher kings, this centralized power that knows better than the common man how to do things. And so much of their worldview was to centralize power because, those states, they're backwards, they're not very sophisticated, we know better. I've spent my time at Princeton or Harvard. Right. I know what's best for that farmer in Georgia or the new folks that have settled Oklahoma or California. And so that's where that came from, that populist movement. And that's what gave rise to the progressive movement. And in 1937, it wasn't just that we lost the check. Then we began this massive growth of the administrative state in Washington, where now, I talk about this in my new book coming out in a few weeks called The Founding Debate. We always talk about the 2,000-page bill that's Obamacare, and that Nancy Pelosi famously said, we got to pass it to know what's in it. That's only the tip of the problem, because after that 2,000-page bill comes tens of thousands of pages of rules, regulations, and mandates by unaccountable bureaucrats sitting in Washington, D.C., now the richest place in America, right? Has the most wealth, the most growth.
4 of the top 5
zip
codes.
7 of the 10 top zip codes, right? and so we've now, Congress has delegated so much of its duty to these unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats that just issue rules, laws, mandates, that there's no check on any of that. That's not what our founding fathers envisioned, and it's killing America. We're not competitive with the world market. States can't compete against each other. That is a system that all boats rise, and that's not good for our country. It's just not good.
And so let's lead into that with take it to the next step. So you're working at the Liberty Foundation, and among other things that you do, and you've been you're the fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and you know your background. It's very impressive. And so tell us about the Liberty Foundation. What the real genesis of what it really how it came about that you're going to work on these projects, and how do you go about doing it?
Yeah, so the Liberty Foundation really came out of looking across the country and saying, you've got a bunch of groups that are in Washington, D.C. that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on both sides of the aisle on Washington. You've got groups in the states, both sides of the aisle, who spend far less trying to impact state policy. What we don't have and did not have is a group that is across the country that looks at the influence and the kind of the coming together of both federal and state policy, how it's impacting states, what can we do in Washington, all those types of things. So the Liberty Foundation really became a group where we said, let's work to educate citizens, to educate policymakers, to educate those folks on the right and the left about how we best can advance a liberty agenda in America that creates greater freedom, more prosperity, more opportunities for Americans. Because at the end of the day, Americans don't care whether you're an R or D. They don't care about all the, whether you're shouting or whispering. What they care about is, are you getting things solved so that when I sit down at my kitchen table with my wife and kids, we can get ahead and create prosperity for our kids and grandkids, so that I know that the next generation is going to be better off than we were. And that's not happening. Our generation today is the first generation that's probably going to see a backward slide from what you and I have experienced. Yeah. And that's, again, we've got to unring the bell that America is in decline and get it reinvigorated. And the way we believe to reinvigorate America is from the grassroots up, from the states to Washington. Washington is never going to fix America. The states are where we're going to get those laboratories of competition, come up with the best and brightest ideas that lets all boats rise, and we create the reawakening, the reinvigoration of American exceptionalism, and that's really what we are trying to do.
And we're going to take a break right there. That's a great place to stop. It's Steve Laffey here with Matt Mayer from the Liberty Foundation. Steve Laffey's Fixing America at LaffeyRadio.com. We'll pick this up after the next break, where Matt is taking this from state to state and what he's really doing to bring back more competition among states and giving the information that people need so they can understand how we fix America and how we bring it back. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs. I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma, asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
I mean, Kay Bailey Hutchison, double-digit lead over Rick Perry. Right now, Rick Perry, double-digit lead over Kay Bailey Hutchison. This was a collapse by the senior citizen, a senator from Texas.
Why? I mean, you know, when he came out with his comment, remember you and I talked about it when he said it. I mean, he was all about secession from the Union. He was talking about states' rights. States' rights is, to most people of color, a racist term.
Yeah.
And I thought he'd hurt himself. Why wasn't she able to kind of jump on that and use it?
Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. That's a couple of years ago. That's 2008 when Kate Bailey Hutchison ran against Governor Perry. And you hear Rick Sanchez from CNN talking about states' rights is a racist term. And another guy can't believe that someone wouldn't use it. That's what gets at what you were talking about earlier, Matt. Steve Laffey with Matt Mayer from the Liberty Foundation. We're happy to have him in and talk about competitive federalism, talk about states and what they can do to compete better, and how the Liberty Foundation and what Matt's working on is really working on helping states compete to really help fix our country from the state level up.
Yeah, so you know what we've been doing the first, because we've only been up now for about a year, and what we've done is we go around to the states, we meet with legislators to explain what competitive federalism is, educate them on that. We do public events with citizens to, again, do the same thing, because as you know, so many people don't understand our constitutional roots. Where did things come from? How did we get to where we are today? What was the system like before the system? Because many Americans, all they've ever known is this behemoth of the federal government in their lives. So we explain what that is. And then on certain issues, we go and we participate. So like, you know, over this last year with the debate in the states over expanding Medicaid.
Yeah, tell us about Ohio. And a lot of people don't know that John Kasich, who is the quote unquote conservative governor of Ohio, and put double quotes.
There's no quotes there. He's just not a conservative.
I mean, but he was when I was on the O'Reilly Factor.
Look, he was my congressman growing up.
Okay.
I walked parades with the governor. Had great affection for him and believed and was excited about him winning in 2010 in Ohio. And unfortunately, Governor Kasich is a pale imitation of Congressman Kasich, who was such a good budget hawk. Under Governor Kasich, from his first budget to his fourth year budget, state spending is going up 20.1%. 20.1%,
Wow.
more than 6% per year in Ohio under John Kasich. He fought zealously to expand Medicaid under Obamacare to a point where the way he ended up having to do it, because we were able to get the legislature to say no thanks, was through an executive order, very Obama-esque, and there's this little thing in Ohio called the Controlling Board, which is a 7-person board that is supposed to consider federal spending requests when the legislature is not in session or that are unexpected or unanticipated opportunities. So, race for the top money, it gets issued out, legislature's not in session, Ohio doesn't want to lose out, we want to compete for it, right? That's what it was. This was not about billions of dollars that were available throughout the entire session of the legislature. The legislature passed a budget bill specifically saying we do not want this federal money, no thank you.
A Republican legislature.
Oh, yeah, 60-40 Republican House, 23-13 Republican Senate. That he then used this controlling board, and you needed 4 out of 7 votes, majority. One of the appointees was his from the executive branch, and then you had essentially, in addition to that, you had then 2 Senate members, 2 House members on each side of the party. Well, we knew what the left was going to do, and so we knew going in it was essentially a 3 vote maybe, and that 4th vote was the key. We thought we had it in the Senate, and it was really came down to the House side. And what ended up happening is he cut a deal behind the scenes. The morning of the vote, the Speaker of the House pulled the 2 no votes in the House off the controlling board, replaced them with a no and a yes vote that then gave the governor and 1 senator went that way. So it ended up being a 5-2 vote to expand Medicaid. And that's being litigated now in the Ohio Supreme Court. But this decision, right, because we are going to be on the hook now for this expansion that is going to add hundreds of thousands of Ohioans onto the Medicaid rolls.
And tell people about the short-term gain that governors like, I guess, versus the long-term disaster.
So for 3 years, the federal government picks up 100% of the expansion cost, right? But after that, it drops to at least 90%. And we all think it's not going to be 90, it's going to be 80, 70, because the federal government's broke. Mm-hmm. Paul Ryan's budget had it less than 90%. The president's own budget after Obamacare had it less than 90%. So the states are saying, yes, we'll pick up 10% in year 4 or more for the foreseeable future. And it's 10% of an unknown number because nobody knows how many are going to show up and how each one's going to cost. So it's this blank check that every governor who accepted Medicaid expansion has now given the federal government over their state budgets. And it's already called the Pac-Man of state budgets. Mm-hmm. So again, this is a conservative governor who went against the legislature and really used kind of types of things like, famously he said to a legislature, to a couple of legislative members, St. Peter, when you die and go to heaven, St. Peter's not going to ask you if you kept government small. He's going to ask you what you did for the poor on Medicaid. I mean, that is not theology, right? It's not the let's use government as render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God, right? This whole idea
we
that
can get off on the fact that it really isn't St. Peter. That just someone just says that, but
right. I mean, this is what we do in our personal lives, right? Is what we do. Charity is important in our personal lives, but that's not to use government.
No.
And so it's just the way he did it was bad. He's about to raise taxes on the oil and gas industry and the Utica Shale Formation, which is going to hurt Ohio. And look, here's the reality. The job market, the jobs economy under the governor has been anemic. In his 3 years, we went from adding 99,900 private sector jobs in his first year, dropping that down by more than half to 42,300 private sector jobs in his second year. And right now, with only a couple months left, we are at about 30,000 jobs, private sector jobs in Ohio, the 7th largest state, 11.5 million Ohioans, and we've only added 30,000 jobs this entire year. And it's a declining trend. If you increase taxes, if you increase government dependency, right? If you increase spending, all you're doing is creating an environment where, as we talked about earlier, people like you, people like me, we're going to say, great, we're going to vote with our feet. We're going to head to a place where we feel that governors, state legislators are being more responsible. That's competitive federalism. He's making some bad decisions, but it will cost him in Ohio at some point.
And to go back to, what did you try in Ohio, and what are you doing now? What have you learned from the situation? Because you would have looked at it from the outside, and I'm the only living elected Republican to be attacked by the Republican Party, living or dead, it looks like, from Lincoln. So I've been through this. But if you told me that I had a legislature that was 2/3 Republican,
right?
Even in Rhode Island, let's say, or here in Colorado,
right?
I think I'd do a jig. I've always fought. I had at one point the city council when I was the mayor had six Democrats, 3 Republicans. We won about every battle, but changing votes took enormous amount of effort. You have a situation almost like George Bush had, and he kept increasing spending and brought in all kinds of federal spending. But what did you do there, and what did you learn about what you need to do in the future?
Well, so I wrote a book called Taxpayers Don't Stand a Chance, and the subtitle of the book is why it doesn't matter who wins. We end up taxes and all that. It gets worse, right? It doesn't matter whether it's R or D if it's not people of character that are rooted in a philosophy that understands the idea that we need to keep government in a limited fashion, because that's where prosperity and freedom grow. That's where the entrepreneurs can do their thing. And so what we've learned with the Medicaid fight, and we fought Medicaid expansion in 8 other states as well, where what we did is we did surveys of state citizens on what they thought of it. And then we presented that to legislators. We presented it to the public to say, look, the media likes, I call them ginos, journalists in name only. They love to put out there that a majority of Ohioans, a majority of New Hampshireans, a majority of Oklahomans support Medicaid expansion. Well, that's just not true. Right? The reality is a huge number of liberal progressives support Medicaid expansion, but your persuadable middle independent voters, your Republican voters oppose it in large numbers. And it's only because partisan Democrats are so enthralled by Obamacare, so enthralled by Medicaid expansion, that it makes it look like if they're at 85% approval, but your Republican independents are at 70 or 75%, you can do the math on how that comes out. It looks like it's a bare majority support, when the fact of the matter is we didn't. So we said to these folks, you are going to expand a program that the base and the persuadable middle say to you, we don't want this. Why would you do that? Oh, and by the way, in many cases, a majority, in some cases supermajority, of current Medicaid recipients are liberal progressive oriented. So by expanding a program, you will simply continue to expand folks who believe in liberal progressive government is the answer to all things. And in the long term, you're going to make it harder for Ohio or other states to remain competitive, because it's going to be, you're still living in the blue social model, right? Unions are in control, taxes and spending should be high. The types of things that mean jobs are not happening, the best and brightest are leaving, and we see that in Ohio. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars educating our kids in K-12 and higher ed, and guess what happens? They move to Colorado or Texas, and we lose our innovators, our future entrepreneurs.
Yeah, in fact, it's in some of these states it's happened so long. My high school principal, when I graduated from high school, I was going to college in Maine, he said, this is 1980. Steve, the worst thing we have going on in Rhode Island is that you're never coming back.
Yeah, exactly. And guess what? The average age in Rhode Island is substantially higher than it is in Texas.
Yeah.
And guess what that means?
People aren't coming back.
More people that are going to be on Social Security, Medicare, more on Medicaid, more on even good things, veterans benefits, right? But you have an aging population because your best and brightest are leaving, well, how are you going to afford all of these government services to the folks that are in that aging population if there's nobody there to essentially have income taxes, property, sales tax, the stuff that allows you to provide vulnerable populations good services,
and
right?
So your group is is bringing this to everybody. In other words, it doesn't matter what party they're in.
We don't care. Because, again, I believe Andrew Cuomo wants as much power and money to stay in New York as Rick Perry does. And so for us, it's not a partisan issue. Governors, no matter what their affiliation is, state legislatures, no matter what the affiliation is, they want to have as much power and money as possible. They're just afraid to take on Washington because right now there's that hook. So what we believe is we've got to build the national movement here. We've got to educate folks so that they understand what the problem is, know what the solution is, and can then do the work that we don't do, which is get out there into the trenches and force your state legislator, force your congressional member to start moving this issue legislatively, because we're a C3, so we do the education part, knowing that there's going to be lots of C4 groups and other folks that start advocating right for the policies that we think are the right answers to America's problems.
We'll take one last break here at Steve Laffey with Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We got Matt Mayer on the phone, and we're excited to have him. We'll have one more break. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange strip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty 5. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
Training is about more than muscle. It's about inner strength. So I push myself. That's why I serve in the United States Coast Guard. I train with the best. A team that shares my drive and commitment. We collect intelligence, guard our shores against drug smugglers, and keep our waterways safe, because our nation expects more.
If you expect more, maybe you were born ready. Find out at GoCoastGuard.com.
So, Jacqueline.
Yes, Mom?
I wanted to talk to you about something and... Oh, wait. Hold on. I just got a text. Oh, there's another one. Wow. Busy me. So, anyway...
Oh, wait, Mom. I just got a message. My friends keep commenting on my comment. Oh, there's another one. So many comments on my comment.
Oh, I can't wait to watch TV tonight. Playoffs!
Hey, guys, check out my new video game. Pew, pew. Wait. Mom, what? Huh?
What? Hold
What'd you say? Wait a second, what?
This weekend, unplug. Take your family to the forest. There's nothing in the world like experiencing nature firsthand. Trees, paths, bluebirds, streams. Getting closer to nature can get you closer to your family. To find the forest nearest you, go to discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
I want to say this, Don, about this whole race issue. It's 2 things that we need to concentrate on. One is this Tea Party movement, and I'm saying it in this sense to all the Tea Party movement out there. Black folks don't think you racist. We think your ideology is racism when you start hollering state rights, because when you know the history of this country, the reason Dr. King marched on the federal government was to stop states' rights, because we were having Jim Crow laws put into place. So when you start hollering state rights, we start thinking Jim Crow.
Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America, and we've changed the term to competitive federalism. We're not talking about state rights in the show today. We're talking about competitive federalism, where we get states to compete amongst each other. And we're with Matt Mayer, who's out of Ohio right now, who's lived in Colorado, who's involved with the Liberty Foundation, among a number of other groups. He's an author, but it's very important what we're discussing here. And I think as Matt, we get into the last segment of the show. When I've given speeches, the 10th Amendment comes up. Someone comes up from the crowd and goes over the 10th Amendment and tries to pertain it to Social Security.
Right.
And it's sort of an odd, for many people, it's often left field kind of comment. Why don't we talk about the 10th Amendment? It's very important to what you're doing, and because you're the lawyer, but the first.
I used to be a lawyer. Don't you?
Okay,
I'm
sorry.
Smear
I
me.
won't attack you. But the first 9 amendments are about rights.
Rights.
This one's about power.
Yeah, well, the first 8 are about rights.
Okay.
Right? The 9th and 10th are 2 corollary provisions. Very important to be seen together. Because one says, hey, just because there are these other 8 rights doesn't mean those are the only rights of the people and the states. Right? They have far more rights than what we've written down here, but these are 8 ones we want to make sure crystal clear, you federal government understand these are the rights of the people, but there are lots more rights. The corollary of that is, but we also need you to understand, federal government, that unless it's expressly stated here, your powers are limited to just what's expressed here. unlike the powers that we've written down in the rights of the people. So very important, the 9th, 10th Amendment are seem together, because one says we have more rights than are listed. You only have those powers that are listed. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because that's where it's not about states' rights. I mean, the interesting thing here is what the NAACP, and look, the NAACP in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, Thurgood Marshall, 60s, 70s, great organization. Vital, the work they did to make sure that African Americans, especially in the South, could get past the Jim Crow laws, right? No doubt about that. But like many organizations, now what do? They're all about race baiting. They're all about creating these caricatures of Republicans, conservatives, states. And they've essentially forgotten that, look, America, we are a flawed country. We know that. Nobody's perfect. Only one area is perfect, and we know which one that is, right? But our founding fathers created a document that was self-correcting. We ended slavery, right? We gave women the right to vote. We didn't intern a bunch of Muslims after 9/11 like we did the Japanese Americans here in Colorado in Fort Collins, by the way.
That's right.
Right? We have always improved upon ourselves over the course of history. We've never gone back, right? I mean, we are debating, Guantanamo Bay as if it were the rounding up, the taking of property of Japanese Americans from all around this country and shipping them to Colorado, where they spent the war in the 1940s under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That would never happen today, right? So we are never going to go back to a time where we are disenfranchising voters, where we are taking away rights. We are creating two classes of citizens. We've only improved upon ourselves. That is the beauty of our country. That is the beauty of our Constitution, right? So when we talk about giving states the ability to compete, these laboratories of competition, let's not forget, right? This is the thing that the left and the NAACP don't want to ever admit. Do you know where African Americans are moving to today? They left the South and headed north: Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland.
They're heading south?
Right? Guess what? They are heading south. Because why? After the Civil Rights era, after we passed the Civil Rights Law, right, where businesses started going into the South because they could escape the yoke of unionism, right? They created prosperity and jobs like nobody's business. We create 3 times as many jobs over the last 23 years in right-to-work states than in forced unionization states like Ohio. 3 times the amount of jobs. Yeah. And guess what? African Americans, just like you and me, we say we're voting with our feet. I want to go where freedom is its fullest. And right now, freedom is its fullest in the South and West of America. Not in that place where you used to live and where I live, that goes from essentially Missouri all the way to Maine. Now, Michigan, Indiana joined workplace freedom in the last 2 years. Good for them. They're going to put pressure on Ohio,
competitive
on
federalism.
Illinois, competitive federalism. Yeah. That's exactly right. There's nothing wrong with that. Why is it that the default position in America is states have to opt out of forced unionization rather than opt in? Right? Why do we have to choose to say we want more freedom, we don't want control of unions in our state? Why do we have to opt out of that? Because it's the federal law. And this gets into, once we got the progressive era moving, in 1935, the Supreme Court issued a major decision where it said the federal government does not have the power to regulate the wage and hour of businesses in New York. It was a Jewish butcher, Schechter Poultry, where they try to, under the wage and hour, they try to pass a law, and they said, you can't pay this or that. We're going to deal with minimum wage and hours. And Schechter Poultry, they got sued by the federal government because they violated that law. And the Supreme Court rightly said, whoa, that is not in the powers of the Constitution, of the Commerce Clause, to do that. But then what happened in 1936, Franklin Roosevelt, in the election, threatened the Supreme Court, if you don't start seeing things my way, we're going to go from 9 justices to 15. And those additional 6 are going to be folks that see the world my way. And therefore, right, the legitimacy of the court was threatened. So what did the court do? Oh, we gotcha. Okay, don't do that. So in 1937, just 2 years later, suddenly what was 2 years earlier unconstitutional became constitutional. And we've never looked back as we expanded, wage and hour laws, federal wage and hour laws, the Labor Relations Act, all these things, Obamacare, now years and years and decades of federal expansion, there's virtually nothing that the federal government doesn't do that's involved in our lives. And in Obamacare, we had kind of a partial victory. John Roberts wrote a decision that said the necessary and proper clause, the Commerce Clause, the Constitution does not allow you to force people to buy goods.
A product, yeah.
Right? Okay, well, that's good. Unfortunately, what he said is, but if you create it as a tax, and if they don't do it, you can then penalize them. Well, that's okay. I mean, okay, I guess it was a Pyrrhic victory, right? Because it didn't pull back and say, wait a minute, let's look at this necessary and proper clause. Did it really mean what Alexander Hamilton said it meant, which was merely convenient? Or did it mean what James Madison and the Anti-Federalists said, and I talk about this in the new book, The Founding Debate, did it really mean necessary means it has to flow from that express power, getting back to the 9th and 10th Amendment. It has to flow from that express power. It can't be something way over here that, I guess it's related, because then virtually everything can happen, right? And Madison said this, as I quote him in the book, and you'll love it, as well as the Anti-Federalists who said, my goodness, if the necessary and proper clause is read as you say it is, the federal government can essentially abolish state legislatures at one point. Now, that's not happened, but really, maybe de facto it has. Let's go back to Medicaid. When state legislatures have so little power over one of the biggest parts of their budget, they haven't been abolished, but in a de facto sense, did they really have control? Are state legislators really able to do anything they can to control Medicaid's cost? To design a program that works for Ohioans in the best and most efficient way? No, they're not. So in some ways, these anti-federalists, right, the Brutus, Sentinel, Cato, against the Publius, which was the Federalist, right, Hamilton and Madison versus people like Samuel Bryan, those folks actually had it right. They saw what was going to happen 28 years later, and it did. And it took a long time. We've almost been like the proverbial frog being warmed up, because when you read the Constitution, you say, well, they can coin money. Yeah. Declare war. I mean, there's more than that. Coin money did not mean create a national bank, and that's what the debate over for Madison and Hamilton, who wrote together. And, we talked about this before the show started. You had visited Grover Cleveland. It was great. In the 1880s, Grover Cleveland's president. Texas has a drought. Congress tries to pass the Texas Seed Act. Grover Cleveland vetoes it, says, I see nothing in the Constitution that warrants this body to create a program that gives money to people who suffer misery in their private lives. That is an act for states or charity to take care of. And guess what happened? After he issued that veto, Americans from around the country rallied up and sent charity to Texas to help those folks suffering through the drought. Take that to New Jersey after Chris Christie. Yeah, give us our money. $61 billion he wants. $61 billion. And I said to Christie, when he said it was a dereliction of duty for John Boehner to not give them what he wants, I went on TV and I said, no. Chris Christie doesn't understand the system. It's not a dereliction of duty. It's an oath. It's an obligation of oath that those men and women in Congress took to say, wait a minute, what might be good for New Jersey may not be good for the rest of the country. Is it really our job to subsidize the recovery in New Jersey on Ohioans' backs? No. Maybe a portion, right? Maybe we can agree on a portion. But did Chris Christie call a special session of the New Jersey legislature to say, we need to raise taxes, we need to appropriate some new funds? Never. Right? Never. Didn't do that, right? He put his hand out to Washington and said, give me my money. And that's the incentive system that we've created that we've got to pull back, because Washington doesn't have the money. It's broke. It's deficit spending. And the only reason they don't have to deal with this is because they don't have a balanced budget. But even if they pass a balanced budget amendment, we both know they're going to figure out a way to get around that too. Just like they figured out how to put off of the federal budget, they have the non-budgetary defense spending that is all this emergency supplemental stuff that's off book. So the whole system's out of whack. We're going to fix it, and the way to fix it is competitive federalism. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Matt. Thanks for having me. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners have learned a lot, and you're on a great mission to help fix America. I think it's wonderful. Thank you. And if you're out there, what website can we reach you at? LibertyFound.org. www.libertyfound, F-O-U-N-D, Liberty Foundation, found.org. LibertyFound.org. Great. Well, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We thank Matt for coming in. We thank you for listening. And remember, LaffeyRadio.com. And we know we ask you all the time, and we love this. Thousands of people liking us on Facebook, but tell people too. We're in the new age here, but we want to tell people. Tomorrow we'll be back with a discussion about competitive federalism. It'll just be me. It'll be the national education problem that we have, and we'll look to fix it. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.